Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April 2nd monthly meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. We are now called to order. My name is Linda Eastley, co-chair of the BCDC, and I'd like to once again thank all of our great BCDC commissioners for donating their time to shaping the city of Boston into a more beautiful, sustainable city. The open meeting law requires that we notify you all, the public, that an audio recording of this meeting is being made by our commission staff. We will now do a roll call of the commissioners that are participating in tonight's meeting. And if commissioners could just say present as I call your name, that would be great. Amy Chambers. Do we have Amy with us yet? Okay. Jonathan Evans. Jonathan might be joining us in just a moment. Diana Fernandez.
Present. And Linda, just a quick note on Amy. Amy is out on bereavement, so she will not be attending the meeting today.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry to hear that. Shauna Gilly-Smith.
Present.
David Hassine, has he joined us yet? Not just yet. Kathy Katarides. We're going to look forward to all of these commissioners joining us shortly. Mimi Love.
Present.
Anne-Marie Lubenow.
Present.
David Manfredi.
Present.
Catherine Morris.
Present.
Bill Ron.
Present.
Lara Solano.
Present.
Kirk Sykes.
Present.
And myself, Linda Eastley. Thank you, commissioners. Our next agenda item is the minutes approval. Is there a motion to approve both the meeting minutes from March 5th monthly meeting and the March 19th design committee meetings?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Has Jonathan joined just yet? Nope. All right. Shauna Gilly-Smith.
Aye.
David Hassine. Not yet. Kathy Katarides. Mimi Love.
Aye.
Anne-Marie Lubenow.
Aye.
David Manfredi.
Aye.
Catherine Morris.
Aye.
Bill Ron.
Aye.
Lara Solano.
Aye.
Kirk Sykes.
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley. The minutes are approved. So commissioners, we have 4 total projects to review tonight. Should be kind of a short agenda, we'll see. And I'm going to ask Christina to give us a report from the review committee, introducing our 2 new projects first, which are 2 Harbor Building 2, which is in the South Boston Innovation Campus, and also 147 West 4th Street in South Boston.
Linda, before we do that, I have 2 recusals tonight, 2 Harbor and 180 Western.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
I am recused on 147 and the first project presented on 475 Dorchester.
Great. Kirk, I'll add 147. I had you on Dot Ave.
And I am recused from 180 Western.
Great. Thanks, Bill. We've got that as well.
As I am.
And as we go into each of the projects, we'll go ahead and just remind each of you who's recused, and then we'll get you back at the end. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Christina, can you start us off with 2 Harbor?
Absolutely. Good evening, commissioners. Per the regulations of Article 28 of the Boston Zoning Code, BPDA staff have prepared the following recommendations for consideration of this commission. 2 Harbor Street in the South Boston Innovation Campus, Building 2. A proposed project at this location contemplates 380,000 square feet of development in a single building. The project site, referred to as parcels T and T1, are owned by the Economic Development and Industrial Corporation of Boston, or EDIC, and is located in the Raymond L. Flynn Marine Park, A proposed project at this location is associated with the previous approval on the site referred to as 2 Harbor Street, Building 1. A notice of project change was filed on February 15th, 2024, and BPDA staff hosted a public meeting on March 12th, 2024. It is our recommendation that the commission vote to review the proposed project. And since Commissioner Manfredi is recused from the project, I recommend that rather than reading both together, we actually vote on whether or not to review each project separately.
Sounds good. All right, commissioners. So we'll start with 2 Harbor. Is there a motion to review?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Great. Please answer aye if you are in favor, and we'll try to get all the recusals straight. I don't think Jonathan has joined us yet. Shauna Gilly-Smith?
Aye.
I don't think David has joined us just yet. So Kathy Kotorides? Mimi Love?
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow?
Aye.
Catherine Morris?
Aye.
Bill Ron?
Aye.
Lara Solano?
Aye.
Laura, are you with us? Thank you. Kirk Sykes?
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley. We will review. Our next project is 147 West 4th Street.
The proposed project at this location contemplates 238,000 square feet of development in 3 buildings on an approximately 1.2 acre site. A project notification form was filed on June 6th, 2024, and BPDA staff hosted a public meeting on July 25th, 2023. It is our recommendation that the commission vote to review the proposed project.
Thanks, Christina. Commissioners, do we have a motion to review this project?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Great. If you are in favor, please answer aye. Shauna Gilly-Smith?
Aye.
Mimi Love?
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubenow?
Aye.
David Manfredi?
Aye.
Catherine Morris?
Aye.
Bill Ron?
Aye.
Lara Solano?
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley. We will review. So Christina, before we move into the report for our next first review of Dot Ave, we just wanted to address that the proponent team for 232 A Street had requested to withdraw review tonight. And so we will be reviewing that project next month.
That is correct. So a slight modification to the agenda this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, so I think we're ready to review our first project, 475 through 511 Dorchester Avenue. Mimi, Shauna, and Kirk, I believe you are all recused from this project.
Yes.
If you turn off your cameras and mute, and then we will get you back for the next one, which I think Shauna,
Linda, I have
you're recused
filed.
from that too, yeah. Oh,
No. I have filed a
An appearance of the disclosure
appearance of, yeah.
conflict of interest. Yes.
Yes. Thanks for pitching in, Christina.
okay, so you'll be joining us on Dot Ave, Shauna?
Yes.
Wonderful. Glad we have your voice. All right. Terrific. So I think we're ready for the proponent team to start us off.
Hello, everybody. It's BK Boley, Stantec Architecture. I'm joined by Mark Rosenshine, who needs to be unmuted, John Sissel, Rob Adams, and Lewis Kraft from my team. Let me share my screen.
While he's doing that, good evening, everyone. Just a very quick recap on the start. As you recall, we have 3 buildings and 2 open spaces as part of phase 1B. We've gone through subcommittee and reviewed open spaces in the various buildings, gotten a lot of great feedback as part of that process. We're continuing to work with urban design folks. And so hopefully this is just a coalescing tonight of all of the various pieces that we've been working on with you together. And BK, you can go ahead and fire away.
Thank you. I'll start by just summarizing what we heard in subcommittee the last time, both comments and recommendations. In general, they thought there was pretty nice progress on the open space and on the Ellery street crossings, the east-west character, the definition of those open spaces, but there was a desire to soften and refine the east lawn a bit, as well as clarify some of the west open space circulation and spaces. We hadn't really shown the retail cafe zones at the edges of 65 and 75, so there was a request to do that as well. On 505, it was thought that there was generally good refinement and simplification, both of the massing of the building as well as the hierarchy of the language and some of the bigger architectural gestures. However, there was a request to look at the stairs along Dot Avenue at the ground floor, that first podium, or not podium, the step up in the terrace to the ground level entrance, and particularly at that corner near the retail or supermarket entrance. So we're going to show you that as well. On 65 Ellery, there was some strong development on the podium skin and the ground level experience. You'll recall that in earlier subcommittee meetings, it was thought that perhaps the experience of the building at the lower levels was not as strong and sculptural as it is from a distance with the tower. So we worked on that also. And then finally on 75 Ellery, it was believed that we had a pretty good response to our corner key moment facing the park, and the rest of it was pretty sweet. I'm going to hand it over to Rob Adams to go through some of the open space improvements. Rob?
Thanks, BK. As you can see on the plan, as Mark mentioned, the three buildings, 65, 75, and 505, all commercial buildings, 495 earlier approved. And as we've kind of lovingly called them, east and west open space. South is to the left on this plan, west is to the top. And so you can see the primary entrances to the buildings are located off Dorchester Avenue and Ellery Street. And I'll say one of the best things that this project has done that really hasn't changed is the infrastructure to the streetscape. So at least 8 to 10 foot public sidewalks, street trees, bike facilities. It's a very robust public infrastructure. And then continuing that concept, we've been working with BTD to provide a single raised tabletop crossing to connect the two parks. And you can see in the plan, we've eliminated the parallel parking and brought I'll say the street trees tighter and closer together to help kind of create that continuity between the spaces. Essentially, the concept hasn't changed. I'll say Laura and Linda and others pushed us to think about, I'll say, the topography a little bit more. And so the eastern park is essentially a void, a central civic lawn with program kind of surrounding it. And then the west park, the one on the top, is a little bit smaller in scale, more intimate in its outdoor room quality. And in both these cases, we've played with topography on the east and west lawn. And so you'll see at the last meeting, I think some of the big comments were, one, just a little bit of more clarification around the cafe zones associated with the two buildings and how essentially those spaces relate to the park. And so some graphics that we had developed probably at the last meeting, not as good as these. And so I think there's some more clarity, hopefully, to answer Linda's question. Some of the concern was around the kind of egress, if you will, from that retail space on the upper right of the plan. And so Santec has done a good job, and I'll say maybe we've done a good job of responding to that as well by making the entrances and the kind of faceting of the building open up into circulation zones rather than kind of directly coming out into the eastern lawn. Another comment that Laura made that we thought was a good one was that central space, that central kind of grove within the middle of the western park, thinking about possibility that the paths could have a different kind of hierarchy. Maybe there's width to create a variation of spaces. And so there's a couple boardwalks through that space, and we've started to vary them. I think the furnishing may vary too, so that within a little space, you get a variety of seating elements. And you can see the two renderings just quickly, some ample kind of cafe seating, but then also directly, I'll say, across from the public circulation, some movable tables and chairs under a grove of trees to help, we'll say, unify that sense of kind of gathering. And I think at one of the earlier design presentations, we did a lot of study and a lot of work around the solar patterns, providing these seating areas in the most solar gain areas for the shoulder seasons. On the next slide, I think Jonathan made a really good comment that you can see in the, I'll say, in the two renderings about whether the park could start to have an address on Dorchester Avenue. Before, we had always kept it back at this 20-foot line requested by the BCDC so that Dot Ave in the future, 10, 20 years from now, could expand if necessary. And so we were able to just, through some paving treatments and some seeding, pull that front edge of the parks onto Dorchester Avenue. So they gave a little bit of an address. So you can see in that top rendering, if you're walking down Dot Ave, the park really comes out to embrace the project in the street. Another comment that Laura had made, again, around the topography, was thinking about how that eastern lawn could be something more than just a flat disc. And so we've done, I'll say, some good work on creating a central flat usable area. And then on the very back side, it slopes up at a greater pitch. But then on the sides, we've also created a series of, I'll say, small berms or edges to help build a little bit of a cocoon. And both, I'll say, Laura and our firm was interested in kind of this idea of collecting snow or leaves. And so I think this kind of collection of or holding of the edges of the lawn has been successful in that. And then I think lastly, there was some conversation as we originally talked about the flood elevation requires somewhere between 18 and 4-foot elevation change along here. There was a request for wide, generous stairs, which we've been able to accommodate. And then the big change, I think, has been eliminating the need for accessible ramps. And so we've been able to lower all the slopes to less than 5%, eliminate the handrails. And I think on the next slide, you can see how that's come to fruition. In concept, a grocer potentially for that bottom floor. And I know Laura and others had recommended us to think about those corner stairs. We've had a lot of iterations. I think ultimately comments were heard and incorporated. I think ultimately, once we understand the retail user a little bit more and their use and desire where entrances are, we'll continue to refine those stairs so that they feel more welcome and gesturing to the community. So that's really, and you can see a little bit of the Dot Ave character, really a positive improvement for the community as well as the Dorchester Avenue corridor. I think from here on out, it'll be BK.
Thanks. So our changes on 505 Dot Avenue included some simplification of the massing as well as simplification of many of the languages that we had. Here is the previous rendering. And in the upper right, you can see there was a section of the building that ran parallel to Ellery Street that we decided to reshape and push away from Ellery Street. So that would open up some of the sky, open up some of the view corridor coming up from Ellery Street from the north side. And then we also looked at kind of taking this element here. We still love this larger kind of crane angular element, but as I mentioned previously, it had a little bit of a yin yang going on. They were too equal, the positive and the negative. So this is the revision that we've made to it by pulling back the massing on this side of the building. If I go back and then forward, you could see it opened up the sky, but it also created these beautiful terraces that are facing south towards the Harbor Islands on that side of the building. By shifting this line over to the right, you can see that it also just helped refine and strengthen that larger move. And then finally, we've made it so that we only have two different materials. We have masonry at the podium, and then we have a champagne metallic, which is the same material throughout the tower. These are the other views of the project. So on the bottom left is Dorchester Avenue looking into the park. On the upper right, you can see it at the corner of Street A and Ellery Street. So as you're wrapping around the corner going down Ellery Street, and then you can see the concept images and the other image I just showed you. On 65 Ellery Street, I already mentioned that there was a desire to see both the podiums of 75 and 65 together, but also to understand that the pedestrian experience is different than the long distance experience. This was our previous prow of the ship. The concept is obviously the schooner. So what we decided to do was a number of things. We got rid of this water line, which we thought was breaking, that white water line was breaking the kind of sense of the waves against the ship and being one singular element. And then we looked at the bow and the structure of the ship in the upper right, and you could see that there was a nice sense of structure that we wanted to have expressed on the outside of the building. So we sculpted the gunwale of the building, which is the thing running along the top all the way around the main deck. And then we also brought this new texture to the outside and simplified everything below it.
Excuse me, just to let the proponent team know you have 2 minutes left.
I'm going to do it in 1. We were also asked to see if we might come up with a way to soften this corner of the building facing the park. And there were 2 different approaches. One was to chamfer the top and soften the gunwale. The other was to chamfer the bottom. This particular one we weren't in favor of because it made the drip line above the terrace. And in the end, we could go with either one of those, but we did like the strength of the original design, but we wanted to be responsive and study other options. Here are the final views of 65. And then finally on 75 Ellery Street, it was thought that the corner facing the park was always a little bit mundane. It didn't have the same level of exuberance as the building had from a distance. And our lily pad was almost had a soggy bottom here. It was too low, too compressed. So we made a 2-story expression. We pulled it all the way from the right-hand side of the building around to a true 2-story lobby entrance on the left. We made an organic shaped canopy, and then we strengthened some of the colors of the rippling water between the lily pads. And then we have curved glass on the corner here. Mark will not allow us to have curved glass doors at the restaurant entrance, so that will probably have to shift over here, which is probably better. But you can see it's a much more simplified but stronger expression. And here's it in the context of different views from Southampton Street and long distance views. And that's our presentation.
You guys were heavily disadvantaged trying to present 3 projects plus open space in the same amount of time we give everyone else. So thank you, Mark, Rob, and BK. All right, so commissioners, if you have comments, please raise your Zoom hand and we can offer those comments and suggestions to the proponent team.
Linda, frequently we have someone who was at subcommittee give the summary of one of the commissioners. Could that be the case today?
Yeah, anyone that has been at was at the last subcommittee, we often ask for your voice, as Shauna is mentioning. I was at the last subcommittee, but I will defer to some of my other commissioners first. Laura, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So some terrific work here in a relatively short amount of time, and I appreciate that. I feel that every time things have gotten more and more tight, and it's easy, even though there are going to be changes that follow this as you respond to tenants, et cetera. I think that you have some pretty good bones here to carry you forward. So I appreciate the responsiveness that we've gotten over the months that we've seen you. And I think it's in good shape. I have no specific comments for once.
Thanks, Laura. You and I have been fortunate to have been part of, I think, the last maybe 3 of these subcommittees. So other commissioner comments?
Yeah, I was at the last one as well. And I definitely have to agree with Commissioner Solano that there's been a lot of changes, and you all have taken that and not have shied away from it, but really have embraced it, no pun intended. And I think for me, personally, it's in the best shape that it is right now. I don't have any more comments, but it feels connected. It feels very true to the story, and all the things in between that connect the story, and just the subtle details I think will carry out for future generations in the community that enjoys all of these spaces.
Thanks, Catherine. Other commissioner comments? I can add, oh, go ahead, David. I didn't see your hand. I apologize.
never got it up. I just unmuted myself, but thank you.
Okay.
I agree with my colleagues. Just a couple of comments. I think the improvements on the building on the left was the number I can't remember, the address number, the address of the building I can't remember, but I think those improvements, especially at the base that you pointed out, raising the corner to 2 stories, as everybody has said, has gotten better and stronger. Yeah, that image is 75. That image is really very strong now, and I think the change in the base is a really strong improvement. I think let me see if I get the right one. Wow, what number is the schooner?
65.
65. My one comment, I think this is Bill said it last time, the last review that I participated in, that this building has just the opportunity to be really great. And I think you've made it better. I'm going to again urge you to look at I'm going to be very pedestrian and call it a podium, as opposed to a hull or a prow or not being a boater. I think it's still a little bit, the rest of the building has such elegant folds where the sails are. The way you've lifted up out of the water on this corner now, and I completely agree with the changes you've made there. I still think it's a little heavy, and it could have a little bit more shape to it. Not a lot. I'm not trying to make those lower floors less practical as lab floors. I'm just trying to bring it up to the same level of subtlety that you have on the rest of the building. And I don't know if that's in this 3-part composition. That's just a slight fold, a slight canting, some shaping on one of those 3 on the 2 longer sides. But I would ask you to look at that again. But it's really strong as a group of buildings that each are different. You managed to really pull that off well, that they feel like they come from different places and they make a neighborhood rather than a project. And I think that's our colleague, Eric Howler, always used to say on projects like this, you have to ask, when you do multiple buildings like this, more or less concurrently, or at least they're designed being concurrent, you have to ask the question, what do they have in common and what makes them different? And I think you've done a beautiful job of answering that question, and the diversity is really powerful.
Thank you, David. Anne Marie?
Thank you. I really appreciate all the work that has been gone into this project and considering the public realm at the ground level and addressing issues of resiliency. I think when we have been thinking a lot about the scale of projects like this that we've been seeing at BCDC, including Dorchester Bay, very nearby, and districts like the Seaport District or Kendall Square. And I keep coming back to the question, what distinguishes this development from those? I think I have a different perspective or opinion than some of my colleagues about the degree to which it reads as a whole. I still see this as a series of buildings or objects in a space, and would just encourage you as you move ahead with the design to think about what creates that common thread, because I think maybe it has to do with the fact that they're all equal. The buildings are all generally equal. The floor plates are equal size. They're evenly spaced. And just how might you, just even looking at this view, how might I look at this and describe this to somebody as, this is what defines the character of this place. So just some food for thought as you move ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Bill and then Shauna.
I wanted to echo David Manfredi's comments about the project. And I do find the quality of the landscape as you look in to it from Dorchester Avenue, particularly, and then the clarity of the 4 different buildings that form the edges. So you have the continuity of the landscape and the disparity of the 4 buildings to be, I see it as a real chance in this city to test the clarity of this differentiation of the buildings. And so I compliment you, BK, for what you've done to bring these together, and wish you best.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Shauna?
Thanks, Linda. Thank you, Rob and BK, for the presentation. This is the first time I have seen the project, and it with the very abbreviated presentation, it's hard to get a picture of the overall. But generally, as Rob was describing, the infrastructure of the project, the green infrastructure of the project, is very exciting and robust. And I particularly am taken by the raised up lawn in the other view. I think it was the Ellery view. So I think it's actually a very exciting project. The only thing that I think maybe hasn't nailed it yet is that stair corner. It still has a little bit of a prosaic quality to it, but I think given the level of the stair and the sloping walkway connection, it still feels a little functional but I think it could be developed absolutely given the sort of skill and finesse we've seen of the other elements of the project.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Shauna. I can add a few comments and then we can see if we have any public comments. As I mentioned, I've been lucky enough to be part of many of these subcommittees, and I just wanted to compliment the team on the poetry that you've really incorporated into this scheme and getting us to really understand. I think, we're looking at maybe the oil derrick here, and then we've got the schooner, and then we've got the lily pad blossom, kind of both of those on Ellery. And I think the idea that the open space really becomes the element that brings all of these disparate buildings together. I really like Anne Marie's comment as well, that while the open space is that continuum, there may be pieces as you continue developing these 3 buildings, because 495 has already been approved, but as you continue developing these buildings, developing something that helps the buildings to talk a little bit more to one another. And I know this is a team that can do that well. A couple other quick comments. One is more macro in scale, and that is that any open space that we can get in this section of the city along Dot Ave is really welcome, and so appreciate you devoting so much of this site to the development of this East Lawn and West Lawn. And I know that we've got more open space to review as these parcels develop, but kind of kudos to you for that and really creating this green space as the heart. The other thing I just wanted to comment on quickly was really the character of the open space. And I think we're looking at the East Lawn here. And one of the things I really appreciate, Rob, that you've done here is with the pillowing. I think that's what Laura and I were talking about last time. The pillowing or the cushioning of the lawn, because one thing that I'm noticing in the renderings today that I didn't notice in the past is that kind of topographic change actually helps to visually dissolve Ellery Street from this view. And you have the idea of this green reaching all the way back to the service road, which is also dissolved because of some of the pieces that you're introducing there with the trellising. And I think that that's a really wonderful thing to be able to stand on Dot Ave and to look into this site and to see that green. So I appreciate that. And the last comment I had, because we had spent some time thinking about how these buildings touch the ground and how do you animate the kind of lower floor as you're walking around this site. And I just continue to encourage you to be thinking about that as you're starting to demonstrate today on all of these buildings, so that we've got a really kind of a lively first floor spilling out into some of this public open space and vice versa. I think that'll really help with the vibrancy. Christina, do we have any public comment? I see Patty with her hand up.
Yes, at this time, we would like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Patty McCormick, we see your hand raised. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, hi, this is Patty McCormick. I'm an IAG member, an Andrews Square Civic Association officer, and a longtime resident of Andrews Square. And I just want to say Andrews Square has waited a long time for the recovery of this area that has been vacant and unhealthy for decades. We appreciate everyone's efforts and vision, including BCDC. On the Dot will transform our neighborhood into a vibrant area that will house our elderly, provide good paying jobs for community, include locally owned retail, some will be affordable, provide open green space for families to enjoy, add to our tree canopy, which does not have one city tree in a 1 mile stretch, and address our antiquated infrastructure. It is beyond what we could have imagined. We look forward to getting shovels in the ground, building this out, and proudly celebrating Andrews Square. I thank you all for the work you've done on this. And Linda Zablocki is here. If you don't mind, she's going to chime in.
Hi, Linda Zablocki, resident of Andrews Square, president of Andrews Square Civic Association and IAG member. And I'm not going to repeat anything that Patty said because she has said her share, but I don't know if anybody on this board has ever looked at that property before it was even touched by core development. It was a hellhole. 3 stories high of junk that you would have on your windowsills, the rust, the color, like I said, Sienna Brown from your Crayola coloring box. Had to wipe them every day. This is such an improvement beyond what we would have imagined. We've had other people approach us that wanted to put a Costco in down there at one time. That would be it. It would have been a Lowe's. And this is going to gather together a community. This will be a small city in itself. It will be the place to be. And I can tell you this, there is a lot on the Dot. If none of you have been there, and this is run by CORE, just a small little area, if it's any indication of what's to come, we in Andrews Square have hit the lottery, without a doubt. The design and the history that is put into this whole thing, and this is through the design board and all of CORE's people who have worked on this, is unbelievable because there is so much thought process put into the history. We've been burying history for years, just knocking down buildings. We're building them to create some history. So I think that this is going to be the place to be, and I invite you all to look up a lot on the Dot and come down and take a little stroll. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you, Patty. Any other public comment at this time? I see no additional hands raised. Chair Easley.
Thank you, Christina. Well, commissioners, I suggest we ride the wave of enthusiasm from Patty and Linda and see if we're ready to make a motion on this project. Would anyone be willing to make a motion?
Motion to approve?
Yes, thank you. And a second.
Second.
Great. All those in favor, please say aye. Shauna Smith.
Aye.
Anne Marie Lubinow.
Aye.
David Manfredi.
Aye.
Catherine Morris.
Aye.
Bill Ron.
Aye.
Laura Solano. Laura, I see you with your fingers, but I don't think we can hear you.
Aye.
Great. Thank you. And myself, Linda Eastley, you are approved. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
the help.
everybody.
Thanks,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
We'll miss you.
We'll be back.
We'll be back.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye for now, I think is the. All right, Christina and Lizzie, can we invite Mimi and Kirk back in? And we're ready to move on to 180 Western Avenue. Shauna, you are marked as recused from this project. I don't know if you are. Also, David Manfredi, Bill and Laura are recused from this project.
And I just wanted to note for you, Chair Eastley, that I believe Commissioner Evans has joined the meeting.
Great, thank you. All right, once we have our recused commissioners with their cameras off and muted, we can begin the presentation. Thank you.
Members of the proponent team, have you been all appropriately elevated to co-host to begin your presentation?
I think so. Is it okay to begin?
Great. When you're ready, we'll
Okay.
let you know when there's 2 minutes to go.
Okay.
Sorry, I mean 2 minutes to the end of your presentation. You can start at will.
Okay. Okay, good evening, commissioners. We were here to see you all, the full commission, on January 2nd, and we heard some feedback that included thinking about showing more context, thinking about the public realm on Bertram Street, and providing a little bit of detail on the architecture, specifically the change of material from brick to metal. We saw some of you at design subcommittee in March, and we heard additional feedback both on the public realm and on the architecture show. So we're going to show you some responses to some of what we heard this evening. We talked a little bit when we saw some of you last time in March about the context of Barry's Corner and about the idea of Barry's Corner as a neighborhood center that's evolving over time. It's a common ground between Harvard and the sort of the smaller, finer scale residential neighborhood to the south, but also a common ground between a lot of the larger development that's happening along Western Avenue. We also pointed out when we saw you last that we're fully compliant with the WACRZ guidelines that were adopted in fall of 2022. The building's about 85 feet tall, 7 stories, and about 17% affordable. When we saw this design subcommittee in March, there were four asks, if you will. We were asked to look at 4 things on the public realm, and I'm going to show you our responses to those. This is the plan that we showed then. I'm going to click to the next slide, which shows some ideas about how we would respond to those comments. And you're going to see those 4 things here at the corner of Western and North Harvard, along North Harvard and the promenade of plantings there, here on the Bertram Street open space, and then on Travis Street. So going along, I'll start at the corner. We were asked to look at more frontage zone, or more a sense of buffer for the pedestrians at this intersection. So we've looked at how we might add additional frontage zone there. We do have a lot of physical constraints there between the mast arm, some of the pedestrian ramps, but we're willing to continue to look at that going forward. We were asked to add variety and diversity in the plantings, and we've indicated that we think that we're definitely able to do that. It's shown diagrammatically here with different colors. we were asked to, actually Elizabeth asked us to look at moving this door off of the backdrop, the green backdrop of the Bertram open space to make that more clear. And we were able to do that. We were also asked to look at being very clear about the sidewalk extending to our property line and the possibility of adding a tree here on Travis Street, which we've also done. This view, not a lot of change here from what you saw last, but indicating that we can incorporate diversity and variety in the plantings here on the North Hartford Promenade. Coming around the corner to the south and back here on the Bertram Street open space, we showed you when we were here last time, we're screening some of the plantings to really get into this space or to show you the depth of this space and these two planted zones. And since we saw you in March, we've moved the door, which by the way, does not serve necessarily trash or loading. We're gonna look at that so that there's less trash, less retail loading coming there, and then it's mostly bikes. But anyway, able to move that door and extend this green screen. We've talked about since we've been meeting the notion that the building is sort of two parts, a more sweeping gesture along Western Avenue and a smaller scale of vertical proportions along Bertram Street. And after looking at, the vernacular of the neighborhood, this eclectic mix, we also see a lot of brick. We like brick. We know that the community prefers brick. And so we're proposing a palette of brick in different colors, but a warm mix of colors. When we saw you in January, you asked us to really think about the separation of the brick and the metal, and we've done that. We'll show you a detail in a minute that we showed the subcommittee in March, but we've really strengthened this cornice line, not only the physical kind of meat of it, but also the projection of it. So to add a bit of shadow there. Just going to go through these views, which are a summary of what you've seen. Oh, excuse me. Back in January, when we first saw you, we had brick that was all the same color and somewhat at different heights. You asked us to really look at Bertram Street and make it basically more like our diagram. Where's the smaller pieces? Where's the vertical orientation? So we've done that. We also looked at the window scale and rhythm and are looking at something that's less commercial, something that really feels of the residential vernacular to the south. In March, Commissioner Haseen especially asked us to study going one step further and differentiating the window patterning at the top 2 stories from what's happening in the brick. We're looking at that. We don't love this solution yet, but we wanted to demonstrate that we're looking at that. We believe there's a solution there and that we understand the comment. The comment is about making this a residential feel and that the windows need to be scaled appropriately in order to kind of reinforce that. So this is a study. We don't love it, but this is the direction we're going. We were also asked to look at the art and instead of using it sort of uniformly at the base of the building, to use it more intentionally and to help give identity sort of to this middle volume. And by doing that, kind of differentiating these 3 pieces again and reinforcing that diagram. Just kind of taking a step back here and showing again the open space sort of in the context of its flanking active uses of the primary entry to the building and retail space that could potentially spill out in a cafe zone. The detail that I mentioned before of this cornice, we did show you this in March, but looking at how that might be built and how it might project to add shadow and depth. Finally, we were asked to look at to continue to consider screening large mechanical equipment on roofs. So we just wanted to show a view. I have to zoom in a little bit because it's hard to see. Sorry. But it's just really white or light colored, but we're starting to think about that. And we understand that BCDC wants to see that going forward, or excuse me, BPDA needs to continue to see that going forward as we continue to work together. So that's what we have. I know I went a little bit fast, so I can go anywhere we want to go.
Thank you, Emily. Can you put up a site plan just so the commissioners have a point of reference? Terrific. Thank you so much. I haven't been part of subcommittee meetings since the original presentation to the full commission, so I'm looking forward to hearing from those of you commissioners who attended the last couple of subcommittees. And I see, Mimi, that you can start us off.
Yes, I was at the last subcommittee. And, you know, I think, you know, the proponent team has definitely made adjustments based on our comments. I think the subtle requests that were asked at the last meeting are fairly important to the success of the project. I'm glad that they're being studied. Some of the items that we talked about is definitely that intersection that we want to look at a little bit more detail to make sure that there's a buffer zone at what is now a very active vehicular condition. The other comment I just want to talk about is that refined bike entry. While I really, really appreciate that the door has been changed to that side elevation to allow more greenage and, you know, garden area on that back wall, I do wonder why it's not articulated as just a regular door that can be accessed or articulated like the rest of the doors. It looks like a utility door, and we might have to go to a rendering to see that. Yeah, maybe if you can go to one of those renderings, that'd be helpful. So I think that's a detail that you can continue to work with the BPDA staff on refining. But I guess I just wonder, you know, why can't it just look like the door across from it, for instance? We celebrate, you know, bike usage. And so I don't think it's anything to try to disguise. I think the subtlety in the plane change between the brick volume and the metal volume with that cornice line is something that seems, we talked about last time. I'm not even sure if it changed, Emily. Did it change?
No, we included that as kind of a summary for some commissioners who weren't at subcommittee.
Right. And so I think there's always a challenge in changing a material without too much of a plane change. So a cornice is an effective, you know, tool to mitigate that change in plane. And I think we talked about looking at it to be a little bit more exaggerated and create a little bit more shadow to, you know, heighten that effect. So these are subtle changes that I imagine you'll continue to work with the BPDA staff on, including shifting the window conditions. But maybe we can go back to a site plan and talk about that corner condition. And one of the things that we talked about, and we really are trying to be more thoughtful about ensuring that these buildings are of the neighborhood. So I don't want to take that art piece lightly, and I really want your team to continue to work on that. We may even want to see how that lands. This area is very vibrant with, you know, artist installation, murals on walls, etc. And it creates, you know, a character that I think even a building like this should continue to carry on. But those are my comments. And maybe, I don't think we have Commissioner Kim on the call, but this is an area of focus for her. And so maybe just describe, maybe where we can leave it is if, Emily, if you could describe what has changed from the March meeting.
Sure. Doug Jones from LeBlanc Jones Landscape Architecture is here as well. I'll let Doug speak to the changes, but I wanted to point out what we wanted to be able to sort of zoom in and point out a few of the constraints here, and maybe some opportunities that exist without a lot of intervention. First of all, we have this mast arm. It can't move. It's the traffic signals. We have the pedestrian ramps, which are the size that they are. On the other hand, we also have this bicycle turn lane. which does give somewhat of a buffer. We have the small little jelly bean. It's not, you know, it's not significant physically, but it's something that sort of feels like a buffer. And Doug, do you want to talk about what we changed kind of on the frontage zone? I can toggle back and forth if you'd like.
Sure. The changes are subtle. What we had done initially, the frontage zone sort of stopped at the ramps related to the cycle tracks. And right at the corner where she previously had the cursor, sort of opposite that small piece of buffer in the intersection, it was a little ambiguous in terms of where the pedestrian zone was. So we tried to clarify that. So it's really an expansion of the furnace zone. So it now extends to the curb ramps. So there's a more clearly defined corridor as you're rounding the corner. And then we've likewise extended to the curb ramps with the cycle tracks. Commissioner Kim explained she has a lot of familiarity with this part of the city and crossing this intersection. You know, one of the, I think, biggest changes in terms of the present state to the future state is the addition of the cycle tracks. And, you know, while it's a small gesture, there is, you know, a 7 to 8 foot buffer that's created by the cycle track, as well as the queuing space at the intersection. I think everyone is mindful of the, you know, the odd geometry of this intersection and what that does in terms of sight lines. You know, as we considered alternate ways to create more buffer, we did, you know, look at introducing vertical elements. It just felt like it was in conflict with some of the safety concerns here. So I'd say it's an ongoing conversation, and we're, you know, certainly agree with the goal.
Thank you. Anne Marie, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. If we could go back to slide number 17, I've just been reflecting upon Commissioner Haseen's comment about the resolution of the top 2 floors of the building. And I appreciate that this is still a work in progress, but I think one of the things that is, so first of all, I appreciate that the building is brick. One of the wonderful things you can do with brick, which actually, can you go to the detail? I'm looking at the draft presentation. So can you go to, yes. So one of the wonderful things about brick, which I see it's illustrated in the slide on the left, is being able to detail the brick. So just that, you know, the detailing and the use of brick of going, you know, using a vertical brick rather than a horizontal helps in a very subtle, but I think elegant way to add some visual variety. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to do something similar. I recognize it's a different material, so, you know, take this with a grain of salt, but the upper 2 floors, you know, if there's something you can do. I also was looking at the Allen building, which is a historic building that's part of Boston Square. And even just, you know, that building, you know, even maybe varying the window design subtly on the top 2 floors, just to give, again, a little bit of variation, not an abrupt change, but something, because this is a very large building. I think, again, looking at the Allen building, I think the curvilinear form, it sort of balances the building on the, you know, the opposite corner. But I think, you know, if you could just continue to refine the design to think about the detailing, and I would also agree with Commissioner Love's comment on the entrance on Bertram Street, that that is, you know, you made a very deliberate choice in setting back, that's in creating that space, but it doesn't feel like a space that's meant to receive people as it's represented. So again, if presumably people will be using the bicycle storage quite a bit, or also this is you know, it faces a side street. So again, how can you think about creating more of a feeling of entry and welcomeness in that space? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Kirk?
Yeah, take my to stick with the small park on Bertram Street for a second. I just wondered if we could put up the plan or elevation. Yeah. Can you go to a floor plan for a second? Yeah. So it's interesting that the retail kind of gets very tightest to the curb right at the edge of that little inset that you've created, where the bike entry has been changed. I wondered if you hadn't looked at chamfering the ground floor. And I know you'd lose some GFA in the retail, but in a way that the geometries of Bertram Street and Harvard Street kind of reconciled themselves with a little more room. So I guess I'm suggesting where it's tightest to the curb, it would be widest. So imagine if you were to continue the Bertram Street, yes, a more linear, going from the green corner, right, to that corner, yeah. And the reason I'm suggesting it is it's a neat little space, but it's really kind of hidden. And it's a different space. And I also think it might even make some more connectivity to the lobby rather than sort of saying lobby over here, community over there, and then this little hidden park in the middle. So did you do some looking at that condition there?
I can say that we spent a lot of time back and forth with the community, really focusing on this space as well as the Bertram open space. And in order to create this promenade, frankly, we sort of, if you can picture this, the bar bending, we really were focused on bending this bar away from North Harvard Street to create space. And so to create a space, this promenade, as we're calling it, where you can occupy, it's not just passing, it's not just transient space, it's space to really occupy. And so I think what you're seeing here is somewhat a result of having made that move and sort of prioritized this. I don't know that. I think it's something we can look at. I think it's something we can look at going forward and changing the geometry here. And without losing GFA, even we could kind of trade this for this, I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I'm only talking about on the retail level. I'm not talking about on your residential floors, but just thinking about how these two places are perhaps less disconnected. And I don't know how that can happen, but it just strikes me as an opportunity to make the whole thing hold together a little on the ground floor. But that's my personal opinion. I'll defer to the landscape architects. So otherwise, I think the comments that were made about differentiating the materials in the upper levels were spot on, and some greater personification of the planar differences might be helpful. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Commissioners, any other comments? All right. Christina, I think we are ready for public comment if there is any.
Excellent. Lizzie, when you get a chance to flip up the slide, at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Paula Alexander, I see your hand is raised. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I believe I did.
Excellent, we can hear you.
Yeah. I'm Paula Alexander, 226 North Harvard Street in Alston. I own a 2-family Victorian home, and I've lived here for over 40 years. And I agree with comments that Kirk Sykes asked about the Bertram Street area, that cafe. I don't know if you realize it or not, but on the map at the end of the exact end of Bertram Street, there opposite where they want to put the cafe, there's approval for a Sofa Bakery coffee shop. Then on the other side of Travis Street, right opposite the cleaners, is Swiss Baker's Coffee Shop. Then at the on Western Ave, right across from the side entrance of Continuum 2 here, I'll call it, there's a Dunkin' Donuts. So we have a number of coffee shops in this area, and we really don't need another coffee shop. I would also like to see bigger open space. I heard the Dot Ave presentation and how many people loved it. And we don't have that kind of consensus here for this project, because all the designers agreed this plot is very unusually shaped, and to squeeze all this into this site, it's just about impossible to make it look good and to have real open space. I mean, I love the open space that you showed at Dot Ave, and that's what we need here, because we're being surrounded by so many new developments, and we're just losing our open space. The trees around the original Continuum are pathetic. The pavers are all buckled up along the sidewalk. So I'm afraid that's what's going to happen here. And we're really concerned about it. So I hope that you can really design something that's really outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for your comments. Paula, I see that there's another hand raised, also named Paul Alexander, but I'm not seeing another hand at this time.
I just took mine down, sorry.
Okay, that's okay, no, we appreciate you.
Okay.
Christina, I don't see any other hands raised.
I do not.
Oh, I do see Robert now.
Robert Breslin, are you able to unmute yourself?
Oh yes.
Hi, Robert.
Hello. Yeah, so my name is Bob Breslin. I live on Kingsley Street, the next street over from Bertram Street. So from my backyard to the edge of this property is about 70 feet. So Tom Brady could throw a pass over the building from the closeness I am. So my problem is not with the architecture, the trees, the brick colors. It's really, I've said it before, should a building of this size be plugged into this spot when we have Harvard building, the ART, the new residential dorms, the grove of trees, admin building's going to go in, Swiss Baker, that could be up for grabs. I mean, they're already putting dining service is going to go in there. And then there's another 10 projects all along Western Avenue. So we talk about community benefits. I don't see how bringing 700 people into a building, half of them never heard of Alston before, and many will come for the cheaper rent to low income. It just seems like the question should be, should that large building be on that spot? Not what color the bricks are, not how many bike racks there are. So that's really, it seems like it's a foregone conclusion that a large building is going to be built on that street. So I don't know how to back it up from there. It's just going ahead. So that's really all I got to say.
Thank you, Robert, for your comments.
Okay.
Christina, I think that we're done with public comment. I don't see any other hands. I see Paula's hand up again, but perhaps that's just an error. Oh, all right. She heard us. She heard us. All right. So commissioners, I'll just add a couple of comments. I haven't been part of the subcommittee, but one thing that I would encourage the proponent to do as they work with BPDA is to take a closer look at Bertram Street. Not knowing what will occur on the other side of the street, one thing does remain constant, which is that is a much narrower street. And if there are ways to break down the massing or even distinguish kind of different treatments along that facade, I think that it would be well received. And perhaps more in scale with the width of the street. So I'll just offer that. So commissioners, do we have a motion for this project?
I would offer a motion to approve with the continued work and coordination with the BPDA and for looking at open space as it affects Bertram Street.
Thanks, Mimi.
Second.
Have a second. Thanks, Kirk. All right, all in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans.
Aye.
Mimi Lev.
Aye.
Anne-Marie Lubenow.
Aye.
Catherine Morris.
Aye.
Kirk Sykes.
Aye.
And myself, aye. The project is approved. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Christina, can we invite Shauna, David, Manfredi, Bill, and Lara back into our meeting? And as they're coming back in, I am going to hand this over to Mimi to take us through our 2 new projects tonight.
Thanks, Linda. And Christina, I believe I'm handing it to BPDA staff to launch us off here.
Yes, planning context will be given by Ted Schwartzberg, followed by a 10-minute presentation by the proponent, followed by a summary of BPDA staff comments following that presentation.
Great.
Ted, are you able to, if we bring up the staff slides, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thanks, Christina. I'm all set to go. Okay, thanks, Christina, and thank you, commissioners. My name is Ted Schwartzberg. I'm Assistant Deputy Director for Zoning Compliance at the BPDA, and I'll be presenting 4 brief slides on the planning and zoning context. As you can see on this grid, I want to call your attention to the second to right column named relief required as proposed, and that refers to zoning relief, and highlight that the use, height, and open space all are consistent with zoning. No relief is required. Zoning relief for FAR will be required, and I'll explain the planning context for that on a subsequent slide. And also want to note that 125 parking spaces have already been approved for this location as part of a previous Article 80 approval. Next slide, please. And just for brief context, and the proponent will explain in more detail, but there's a previously approved proposal on this site. So that's the building at the top of the page, and then the site that is outlined in red in the image on the right is what we're talking about tonight. And that was anticipated to be a future phase of development when the building next to it was approved through the Article 80 review process. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, zoning relief will be required for floor area ratio. The zoning caps FAR at 2, but as part of the Raymond L. Flynn Marine Industrial Park Master Plan, scenarios for a proposed build out of FAR2 and FAR4 were examined. And because this is somewhat removed from the water on the left side of the image and not subject to maritime industrial regulations, it was recommended through that planning process that FAR4 would be appropriate for commercial uses that are not necessarily maritime dependent. Next slide, please. And on the final slide, again, noting that FAR4 was anticipated as part of the Marine Park Master Plan process. And for that reason, staff think that zoning relief for FAR4 is appropriate. And then the only other area in which this proposal doesn't align with zoning and city policy as it relates to parking. This is in the South Boston parking freeze area and the restricted parking overlay district. And as I mentioned earlier, the parking program was already previously approved as part of the last Article 80 process. And then finally, also want to note that this is in the Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay District, and this proposal is consistent with the requirements of that overlay. and it's being built to a design flood elevation of 20.5 feet. And that is all for the planning and zoning context. Thank you, Christina, and thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, Ted. Have members of the proponent team been elevated to co-host? Are you ready to begin your presentation?
Believe so. Harry, you going to share?
Great. We'll let you guys know when you have 2 minutes left in your presentation.
Well, great. Ted, thank you very much for that intro. It actually cuts down a lot what I have to say, but good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you tonight. My name is Mike Loring with Beacon Capital Partners, the owner for this project. And on behalf of the ownership and the design team, I'm joined tonight by Blake Middleton and Mark Klopfer of Handel Architects and KMDG and Associates, respectively. They will go into much more detail on the building itself, but just wanted to provide a brief introduction, which, like I said, Ted's done a pretty good job, so I'll be quick. Harry, if you could go to the next slide. This is the second building of this parcel. The first building on the left is already complete, or of this slide here, building 1 is near completion. The size of this building is 320,000 square feet of zoning floor area compared to building 1, which is about 380,000 square feet. So just a little bit smaller in size. It does share underground parking. We're not asking for any additional parking as part of this proposal. And then from a sustainability standpoint, which both Blake and Mark will get into with respect to design and resiliency, we're meeting all the latest building code and stretch code requirements, targeting LEED Platinum as well as WELL Gold, similar to what we've done with building 1 and any other Article 37 requirements as previously reviewed, approved as part of the phase 1 building. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mark to get more into detail of our site plan.
Great, thank you, Mike. My name is Mark Klopfer with Klopfer Martin Design Group. We're the landscape architects, and as you saw from Ted's presentation, the landscape here to the west of building 1 was part of the original permit. It is an important gateway to the Ray Flynn Marine Park. It provides really important pedestrian connections to what will be a new and improved Silverway Silver Line MBTA stop just west of the site, connected with crossroads over Hall Road into the landscape. And one of the things that the phase 2 scheme really starts to do is improve the pedestrian conditions to the south side of the site. So one of the things that the project is doing is completely re-envisioning Channel Street, which right now is sort of an alley, into a proper street with street trees and sidewalk. We have street trees on all sides of the buildings, and the streetscape is continuing. The streetscape of Harbor Street of phase 1 is continuing down to the south part of the site. Our resiliency scenario for phase 1 was to have the landscape tipping up to the height of the lobby, which is at +4 from the adjacent grade, which is at 20.5 in elevation. Phase 2, you can see the lobby space here is in the upper left corner. So it's in the northwest corner. And our resiliency scenario here is because the driveway that connects Northern Avenue down to Channel Street is raised up on grade to come to building 1, but has to return to grade to accommodate parcel U, which is just left to this site. And to Channel Street, the lobby is back down with an entrance at 0. So we have deployable flood barriers that go up around the lobby, and there's an internal ramp inside the lobby. So the orange space is that amphitheater ramp space that is the lobby for the phase 2 building. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that the landscape itself is going to accommodate a realignment of Hall Road once that's decided between the city and Massport. It's been a few years in development, So the area immediately adjacent to Hall Road in this rendering is envisioned to be actually part of the road when that realignment happens, but we are taking that into account. And the next one.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Mark, I think I'm sorry, just wanted to check.
No worries. So, so here's an aerial view of the plan that you were just seeing. You can see that the area, the north part of the landscape is mostly open space, has a nice lawn and a grove that's adjacent to Northern Avenue, and more shaded and programmed spaces to the south of the site landscape. And here you can get a sense of the streetscape that goes around the phase 2 building. And I think with that, I'll turn it to you, Blake.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, commissioners. Great to see you all. I'm Blake Middleton from Handel Architects and the lead designer for the project, working in collaboration with Natasha Spada and Studio NA. The big idea in phase 2 is really to carry over some of the genetic material, if you will, of building 1. The buildings are very similar in terms of their internal floor-to-floor heights, overall height restrictions, but the big difference, I think, between building 1 about to be completed and building 2 is that building 2 is really conceived of and understood from our perspective as an infill building. Building 1 really establishes that sort of, forecourt and gateway into the marine industrial park from the seaport, whereas building 2 begins to fill the sort of remaining gap between 12 Channel that you see there on the right and building 1 on the left. If we go to the next, please. And so this concept of establishing and further reinforcing the streets flanking both sides of the building was one of the drivers, and led us also to develop a fairly simple massing approach. You can see that here on this diagram, both on the upper drawing, with Harbor Street facing along there, so the east facades of these buildings sort of beginning to fill that hole and establish, some degree of street wall continuity, and that's more evident on the west side that you see on the lower drawing there. Next, please. And as such, the building form really takes its cues from, thinking about the structure essentially as an elemental block. And then there are adjustments and, let's say, sort of carving away at that block in order to accommodate some fairly irregular property line restrictions and setbacks that are going on, particularly on the south side of the building. And then identifying and highlighting 3 of the 4 corners with these shield elements, we'll call them, where the character of the facade begins to open up more so than the wrapper of the building, which is this sort of lattice of metal and glass, where these become pure glass shields, and they sort of articulate, particularly on the west side, both the main entrance and a series of spaces internally that would be normally used for breakout spaces and meeting rooms of that nature. Next, please. This can be seen in the 2 facade types. So on the left is what is a very simple lattice, if you will, of a horizontal and vertical kind of trabeated system, but created with faceted steel, metal planes. That's all painted in one color, but because of the movement and directionality alternating from floor to floor, creates a variety of sort of color and shadow and light impacts around the building itself. And then that's contrasted with these shield elements, which essentially floor to ceiling glass and more continuous and open glazing, connecting the outside and inside in a more direct way. Next, please. And then this can be really seen in this view here from the northeast, looking along Harbor Street. The second floor podium outdoor space of building 1 really begins to form and define itself now as a courtyard with the addition of building 2. And so we have these 2 buildings sort of working in tandem to each other. The service court is down at the street level, sort of runs in through the middle there. And then again, you can see the sort of continuity of the street that's being reestablished here by the imposition of building 2 in that open field. Next, please.
Just to let the proponent team know, you have 2 minutes left.
Mark has already talked about this ground floor plan. Unless there are any questions, I'm going to proceed past it. It's very evident that we have servicing In the gray areas, the loading dock is shared off of the service court, as well as that court is also servicing building 1, as well as the below grade parking coming into building 1, but extending down in the basement of building 2. And then the southern portion will be leasable tenant space. Next, please. Here we can see a view from the northwest corner looking back towards the main entrance. That entrance is also defined by a series of outdoor terraces running a kind of vertical stack, drawing one's eye down to the entry point there. There's a small curb cut there for a drop-off for vehicles. This is a two-way street along here, along this, what we call the driveway, and it extends and connects into Channel Street. Next, please. And then a view looking northward towards building 1, and then the opening glazing of building 2, and then the lattice that you can see a little more close up. As mentioned before, next please, the first floor is raised up above the floodplain. That creates kind of a short plinth condition, which interestingly enough is actually matched by the building next door, a 12 channel with a series of loading docks also at that level, approximately 4 feet up off the grade. So there's beginning to get a kind of tie-in at that scale from some of the surrounding buildings. Next, please. And then finally, again, an overview of the 2 buildings. Similar motif, similar genetic foundation, if you will, between the 2. The big difference here is that building 2 does make a sort of strong figural element out of the glass shield here. There's a setback at the top floor. There's some common amenity spaces up there, an outdoor terrace for the tenants' joint use. And then again, you can see the terrace is vertically arranged over the main entrance, all of which ties back, that entry ties back to the 2 pathways that are intended to cross Hall Road from the Silver Line station and lead pedestrians through to either entrance, the side entrance of building 1 or the main entrance for building 2, which you can see in this sort of almost little kind of pocket park, plaza between the 2 buildings. And with that, I think I'm finished, almost on time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe we're joined by Elizabeth Stifel, who will give an overview of BPDA staff comments.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Elizabeth Stifel, I'm the urban design staff for this project, and I was the lead for the first building as well. So comments that we've had on the project are fairly minimal, but I think important. The first comment, if you look at this image, you can see I've added the Parcel U project to the lower left of the screen. And this is a project that we've put out for and accepted a proposal and expect to see developed. And so wanted to add that again, so we could look at the project, the proposed project now in the larger future context. And so with that future context, we think that it would be appropriate to think about where the entry to this building is located and possibly orient it more onto Center Street and less towards the project's open space and more into the larger context. Can you go to the next slide? And then we just had a couple of comments on the building design. I think we're not completely convinced yet by the glass insertions, particularly on the Harbor Street side, which isn't shown here because there's nothing happening there. It's a very back of house corner. And so to have this kind of announcement feels a little awkward. And then at this one on the more sort of front of the building, we aren't completely convinced by the resolution of the geometries here. And again, that issue with the entrance and I think also with the balconies feel a little awkward in this location. So we're looking forward to working on that. And then I think we'll also, as we get much further along, we'll want to look at the color with real metal samples, not just in rendering. So that's what we have from urban design staff.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Commissioners, comments? And maybe if the proponent team can just leave up an image. Maybe we'll start with a site plan. Bill Ron? I think you're muted, Bill.
Thank you, Mimi. So we're starting, I have this is a question for Blake, and really it's a big enough question that I hope in the committee meetings we walk through it pretty carefully. So I'm looking at the southwest corner of building 1, and if one of you has an arrow or something so we know what we're talking about, if you could, on the southwest corner right there, that protrusion, and obviously we must have approved it when this building came before us, building 1. So that then I turn to a view, the view that you just had up, a rendered view looking at, yes. So I'm looking at building 1 to the left, which exists, and building 2, and I'm trying to understand the relationship of those two buildings from an architectural point of view, and I'm flummoxed because I'm seeing lots of different angles, but I'm not understanding how they build something up to whether it's an entrance to these two buildings or what. And then the third image would be looking from the southwest, a rendered image of the building looking from the southwest at this very same area. Do you have that? Back up. Well, we'll have that. And so that's a different view of this, the protrusion of building 1 and the relationship between that protrusion and the elements of building 2 at this intersection. I simply do not understand architecturally. And so I urge you, Blake, to share it with us at committee. If you want to say a short word about it now, you can, but I'd really like to understand in care.
Sure. Just briefly, Bill, yes, it's a challenging relationship, agreed. The goal here was to try to provide a degree of spatial definition of this sort of re-entrant corner at the bend in the road. Obviously, while trying to optimize the amount of square footage that we can build on the property on again, a sort of challenged site when it comes to some of the property lines, which are invisible in this picture, but actually are kind of intriguing in their own right. The relationship of the terraces in the front door are actually 90 degrees to that facade that you see in building 1. So there's essentially a kind of a 90-degree relationship between those two. Obviously, there's an open space sort of, bleeding between through the courtyard. Yeah.
Okay, so
happy to get into it further at the committee.
I think that would be very helpful.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to go next to Shauna.
Thanks, Mimi, and thanks, Blake and Mark, for the presentations. I think when first of all, I wanted to say that the even though it's not the discussion today, but but it's setting the context. The open space and green infrastructure on building 1 is pretty exceptional. And so in moving to the second building, I see you're carrying that sort of thickness of the green band along Harbor. But what I would like to discuss in subcommittee is I'd like to discuss the character on Channel Street. I know the intention was to make it a more sort of livable green street. From the views, it looks like the building is kind of swelling into the space, and so I'd like to get into the streetscape. I'd like to get a better sense of what that really feels like, and if there is, sufficient sort of comfortable capacity to achieve the intention that you have on so much of the other parts of the project, and then also to really understand the character of the space between the two buildings and the desired pedestrian activity or not within that space, and if not, then just the overall sort of character and materiality of it. So those are the two areas that I would like to understand most about when we get to subcommittee, as well as the corner of Harbor and Channel.
Thanks, Shauna. Kirk?
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. It's an interesting dilemma to address the resiliency issues with this plinth that then raises sort of the passive surveillance, the visibility, and the street activity up along this edge we're looking at now. I worry a bit about how comfortable people will be. I wonder about how it'll feel on that street, walking alongside that sort of rather impenetrable edge in the space that is in the peach colored, I guess it is. So I think subcommittee, it would be great to understand how you see the relationship from the people outside the building to the edge of the building, and if there is any relief that's possible or ways that people feel comfortable in that edge. And so to that end, I think maybe asking for a few longer views, because a lot of the attention is focused on the park edge of the building, which appropriately, it's a great edge and there's a lot going on, but you have a couple of other edges too. So I'd like to just understand what that street environment feels like. That's it.
Thanks, Kirk. Laura Solano?
Thank you for the presentation. I have similar views to the previous commissioner's comments, but I wanted to back up for a moment and just say that, this is a quickly developing part of the city, and it connects into the Seaport District. And, our building up of the public realm, as well as protecting buildings from flooding, is one project by one project. And I'm a little surprised at the great difference between the landscape in the first building, which was, am I saying that right? Is that building 1 or building 2?
Building 1.
Building 1. I mean, so much thought and care was given to that landscape, and this feels like just a leftover space. It's hard to even call it a landscape. And I think that the challenges of that building being so large on the site have really sort of robbed the chance to continue the public realm in a way that will make both of these buildings, I think, be cohesive and feel like they talk to each other. Shauna's comment about the spaces between the buildings is really spot on. It's impossible to tell what's going on there. And is that space that could be valuable for the public realm, or is it something that everything has to go to servicing? So I would like to discuss both of those things at the committee meeting.
Thanks, Laura. Anne-Marie?
Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to build on my colleagues' comments and suggest that when you come to subcommittee, I'd like to better understand your kind of consideration of the context. As Commissioner Solano mentioned, this is a rapidly changing area with a very kind of abrupt change in use and scale. And I'm just curious how, what we've been seeing tonight is zeroed in on these buildings. So not only, sort of what cues you're taking from the existing context, why and how you decide to either respond to that or to deviate from it. What is the role of these buildings in a rapidly changing district? I think that, how do they fit within the overall vision of the district? This is a really important opportunity, particularly when you're working, when you're developing the building. And I like this idea of sort of how do buildings talk to each other, or how is it cohesive? Thinking back to the prior project we reviewed, that's this question I've been wrestling with. So I'd like to better understand, you know, how you're responding with your design to the context. Also, just in response to the footprint of the building, it is maximizing the footprint of the site. And it seems like particularly when you have two buildings talking to each other and the building responding to its context, where are you making, I'm looking for strategic moves, just as the previous building one did, where you push or pull to respond to the context. And I'm just not seeing that in the design we're reviewing so far. So I'd like to better understand that when you come to subcommittee. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Diana?
Thank you, Mimi. One comment I want to make, if you don't mind, Blake, going up to slide number 1. I think I agree with all the commissioners' comments, but I do think that Elizabeth laid out a really excellent point, as well as it relates to the material expression here with the glass. And I think specifically as we think about its relationship to the public realm, to the adjacent park, it almost warrants like a different material expression, right? That is more of a human scale and perhaps has tactile qualities, right? That sort of engage with that sort of welcoming entrance rather than, you know, a facade that may feel a little austere. So I do think that it is an opportunity for the team to sort of take a look at that sort of material expression and, you know, where is it that we're putting, you know, those quality materials, and where are people located in terms of the experience of the site, and how can that sort of enhance the overall composition and expression here. I will also say too that I think, you know, Elizabeth's point earlier made around the material expression is also important, just given the context of building one, right? And how is it dissimilar or the same to the other, right? And it's like the materials are almost just slightly off in color tone and material expression. And I do wonder if there's just sort of an opportunity for you to free yourself to really look at material expressions that express the unique context and that allow for a contextual relationship, or perhaps a different sort of point of departure that can you know, have this sort of stand out as a unique moment in this overall expression.
Great, thanks, Diana. Maybe I'll just start from where you just left off. I think that's what one of my comments was in terms of materiality. If not similar to building one, you know, maybe you can help us think about the rationale and perhaps a little bit of precedent images, because this is a rapidly, you know, developed area. Give us a little bit more context of what is happening adjacent and help us build a narrative to what actually is right. I think in terms of the building, thanks for the diagram that showed how the massing came together. I think a little bit more review in subcommittee what constraints you have, because it feels that the building is being shaped by your constraints, and maybe understanding that a little bit more will help us understand, you know, where we can push and pull. A couple of things about the buildings, I feel like there's an interesting tension with these balconies and the entrance of the lobby. The scale of the lobby feels somewhat miniaturized. And the proportion feels a little bit small. And I don't know if the balconies are helping or hurting that reading. So some attention to this lobby in terms of scale seems like something we'd like to talk about in subcommittee, in addition to the idea that Elizabeth presented as actually relocating the lobby, a little understanding of, you know, that possible outcome. How will that, you know, affect the way you think about the building will be helpful to understand. And then lastly, if you can just help us understand if that top volume is a penthouse, it reads a little bit heavy with your amenity space and your setback. And so is that a penthouse? Is that an occupiable floor? Can it be set back? I think would be something that I'd love to better understand.
Thanks, Mimi. If I could just jump in here real quick. and appreciate everybody's comments. I think this building is, I think you guys have asked for constraints and what we're trying to deal with. This building's heavily constrained. You know, it's constrained by the FAA from a height standpoint. It's constrained by the surrounding sidewalks that we've previously agreed to, you know, widening sidewalks and opening up Channel Street between us and 12 Channel, the building to all the way to the right there. And then with respect to the green space that was approved with building 1, you know, this is still, at the end of the day, our constraint is this is one campus. So with the green space being approved in the park adjacent to building 1, it's really intended to, you know, speak for both buildings, you know, as part of this singular campus. So obviously we'll take all this in the subcommittee and appreciate everybody's comments, and certainly, you know, a lot of good feedback that we look forward to talking with everybody, but just so everyone tonight can leave with just an understanding that, you know, a lot of the constraints we've been trying to deal with over the last couple of years. You know, we'll provide more context and background, you know, as we get further on in the process, but appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Catherine, I saw for a moment your hand was raised.
Yes, I just wanted to double down on Commissioner Lubenow and yourself regarding understanding context. When I saw this building too, I was a little lost in terms of the kind of porches. It's almost feels like a miss in terms of, is this you know, really residential, or is this in context to having another purpose? And so really understanding why are kind of these porches or balconies necessary in the context of the building and why it's there. I'd like to understand more in the next committee meeting.
Thanks, Catherine. Anne Marie?
Just a quick question while we're on this image. I didn't notice it before, but is there a pedestrian bridge, a second floor pedestrian bridge connecting the two buildings in this rendering?
Yes, that's what you see indicated there. As Mike said, you know, there's a potential campus concept and depending on tenancy or potential tenancy, you know, we want to see if we can have the, you know, flexibility to connect the two buildings at the second floor. The second floor is where the primary amenity program is in building 1. It's also the same level as the outdoor amenity terrace that you saw on that view from Harbor Street. And so that's why we sort of located it there, and it helps sort of provide a break between the sort of the public face, this space here that we see as the entry area, and the service court beyond, which is, you know, fully dedicated to a heavy amount of truck traffic that has to service both buildings.
So I think that's something we need to take up in subcommittee, because it's my understanding that that's something we usually discourage, particularly when you're creating an environment with a love, presumably, you know, with a, you know, enhancing the public realm. So it's just something to keep in mind when we go to subcommittee. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Shauna? Shauna, are you there?
Chair Love, Shauna messaged to say that she was going to be leaving her camera off, but asked support unmuting.
Yeah, that was all. That was all that I was asking, was to be unmuted. I had to leave because my connection was unstable, and I rejoined.
Do you have a comment, or you just wanted to be back?
No, I just wanted to be back.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I think we can see if there's public comments.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information. Please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Just one moment while I scroll through all the list of attendees here. Chair Love, at this time, I am not seeing any hands raised.
All right. So with that, we take a vote. Is that correct, Christina?
It is indeed.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion to send to subcommittee?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. Great. And with that, I'm going to call all the commissioners. Jonathan Eben.
Yes.
Shauna Gillis-Smith.
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubenow.
Yes.
Catherine Morris.
Yes.
Laura Solano.
Yes.
Kirk Sykes.
Yes.
Bill Ron.
Yes.
And myself, Mimi Love. Great. Well, Mark, Blake, and Mike, we look forward to seeing you in subcommittee.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Right. All right. Moving on to 147 West 4th Street. And we have Linda Eastley back.
And Kirk Sykes leaving.
Okay.
And David Manfredi back.
I was going to say David Manfredi.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair Love, I believe we have staff context provided by Ted Schwartzberg first, followed by a presentation from the proponent team, followed by comments from Scott Slarsky.
Great. Thanks, Ted. I think you're muted.
Thanks, Mimi. And thank you, Christina and other commissioners. Again, Ted Schwartzberg, Deputy Director for Zoning Compliance. I'll present 4 slides tonight on the planning and zoning context. First slide addresses the zoning, and I want to highlight the first 2 lines, which are most relevant to design considerations, which are the dimensional regulations. The zoning in this area has a maximum height of 2.5 stories or 35 feet. What is proposed, the higher of 3 buildings is 147 feet. Staff certainly thinks that a height greater than 35 feet would be appropriate given the planning context, but not this height. FAR max is 1.0. Proposal is at 4.6. And again, we think existing zoning is not necessarily appropriate, but we don't think the proposal is appropriate either necessarily. I do want to note that the proposed use of research lab, if you look at the bottom of the table, is a use that's allowed in the current zoning. And if you go to the next slide, I could explain why that's inappropriate from a planning perspective. The most recent plan for this area is Plan South Boston, Dorchester Avenue, also known as Plan.Av. For this site, it proposed heights up to 120 feet. Again, while use is not explicitly relevant to tonight's conversation, it does have implications for design. Research laboratory was something that was considered inappropriate by the plan. So I want to flag here that while the old zoning allows it, had the zoning been updated to be consistent with the planning in the area, this would not be an allowed use. And the reason for that was that this is a transition area from what was seen as the area where it's appropriate to have new larger scale commercial uses west of Dorchester Avenue. So for example, the core proposal, that's where planning viewed having higher scale uses and new uses like labs, whereas this side steps down to the traditional 2, 3, 4-story wood frame residential fabric of South Boston. And so what was envisioned in planning here was a lower scale up to 120 feet and primarily residential uses or just accessory complementary uses to those resi uses. Next slide, please. So this just gives a little overview of the height conversation. Then next I'll talk about the ground plane. So the red line on the image left actually came from the proponent in one of their submissions to the BPDA. So the red line highlights the 120-foot height limit, which is in the plan. The residential proposal is on the right and the building on the left is the lab proposal. And then the map on the right side shows how while on the other side of Dorchester Avenue, heights up to 300 feet are appropriate. But the idea in this triangle where the arrow is located is that 120 feet would be the maximum height.
Linda, you have to stop.
stepping down to 70 feet, and then eventually to the 3-story context that's predominant in the neighborhood around it. Next slide. As you'll see, this unanticipated typology on the next slide has some impacts on the ground plane that I think will be very, very relevant to your review tonight. Christina or Lizzie, do you mind advancing to the next slide? Thank you. So the image on the left is the proposal, and the image on the right is a relevant diagram from the planning process. And the big takeaway here is that this plan envisioned a network of new real public streets with streets and sidewalks, and then also a new armature of public open space. And so you can see in the image on the right how proposed new streets would be built on private property. And as indicated in the example on the left side, there are linear parks that would form an armature for public open space. And staff think that the proposed uses inhibit the ability to realize this part of the plan. And as you'll see on the image on the left, while new full streets might be appropriate in the pathway between buildings running right to left or north to south, that could be an extension of Gold Street. This doesn't read as a street. And then conversely, the one that runs up and down, which is east to west, that potentially is an open space, but we question the utility of an open space given its adjacency next to the loading docks and driveways. So hopefully this planning context as it relates to the goals of Plan.Ave is helpful to your process. And I'll now turn it back to the commission. Thank you.
Great. If all members of the proponent team have been elevated, you're able to start your presentation at will. We'll let you know when you have 2 minutes left.
Great. Good evening. My name is Dante Angelucci. I'm a Senior Vice President with Lincoln Property Company. Thank you all for your time tonight. We appreciate it. As you know, we've been working with in a partnership with Mass Bay Credit Union for it's a nonprofit since February of 2021. NBCU's been in South Boston since 1936 and has over 700 members. They're looking to retain their headquarter presence in the neighborhood, in the proposed facility, and proceeds that will be obtained from this process will allow them to continue to serve the community. Over the past few years, we proposed the project, and it's evolved from 100% life science to a 50-50 residential life science project. As discussed earlier, the .Ave plan has been in existence for some time now. We believe we fulfill many of the requirements in that, and that the zoning currently on the site is for manufacturing and restricted manufacturing, which allows many of the uses we're looking to implement on the site. The proposed residential building does exceed the zoning height, but we were doing that principally to try and provide increased housing production in accordance with the city's goals. Additionally, the site's geometry, NBCU's requirement for a standalone building with surface parking, the adjacent Centra condominiums created massing challenges for the site. We're trying to be cognizant of that, which is how we kind of came to the conclusions with regard to the building layouts we've developed. And as a partner, NBCU has stated that they want a standalone facility, as I stated earlier. The property has been contingent upon Mass Bay Credit Union remaining in place on the site. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to our architect, David Godfroy, principal at DeMellis Schaefer, who will walk you through the design. We look forward to answering any of your questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dante. I'll walk everybody through the design. I want to thank everybody for their time tonight. I appreciate your time and your feedback. As Dante mentioned, the site is located on corner of A Street, .Ave, between 4th and 5th, and bounded by the bypass road on the south side. The pillars of the project, again, as Dante mentioned, the community anchor Mass Bay Credit Union has been on the site since 1936. They want to continue to serve the neighborhood and be an anchor of that facility and have their own facility on there. We want to have a substantial residential component as well as a substantial research component to create a vibrant mixed-use site. The site, as it's outlined here, has the existing Mass Bay facility, which is located here. which extends out to the parking lot, flanking Dorchester Avenue. The scrap metal site has been included and added to the site. And then the former Gold Street, which is a very narrow former street, serves as the entrance to the Accenture residential located here. And that really is an easement that has to be maintained. Some context images. This is the view from A Street with the scrap metals, NBCU in the background. Another view along A Street showing the Accenture residence as well as the existing surface parking that we're looking to change. The Dot Ave plan, as was mentioned, this is a view looking south. Is the 300 foot zone here. The 120 foot zone is located here with a 70 foot buffer as it sort of tapers down toward the neighborhood. And yes, we are above the 120 foot, and that is an intentional in terms to maximize residential occupancy. This is a view looking toward downtown from the site with the Dorchester Avenue here, the lab building, residential building, and bank building with the Accenture in the foreground. The project resolution, as Dante mentioned, began as a 100% research project with the credit union on the corner. We have looked at getting the taking control over the scrapyard site so that we could add a small housing component. Based on feedback from the BPDA, we have increased the housing component to 50% of the site. Some of the context, as Dante mentioned, was that the credit union needed to be on a standalone building, trying to find the best place to make the best use of the site. So we've located that on the corner of Dot Ave and West 5th, giving it prominence as a community anchor. What that does is provide a development area or sort of volume located here. We've taken that volume and based on the feedback of breaking down the massing of the blocks, and I know that there's the blocks shown up there where they're a little different in scale, but breaking down the massing as envisioned in the Dot Ave plan and breaking down the uses within that one site. We've also looked at the differences between pedestrian scale and sort of urban scale. What happens up high, what happens down low? How do you mitigate those two and create compelling arguments? We've started to look at keeping in with the Dot Ave plan about where the podium height is, how that transitions to the neighborhood and stepping back to the upper floor elements. On the ground plane, and I'm going to speak for our landscape architect who's out of the country right now, so forgive me if I don't say anything correct. On the ground plane in the pedestrian realm, the site is a fairly compact site, constrained by the easement that we need to locate here. So we have located the credit union, as I mentioned earlier, along Dorchester Avenue on 5th and A Street, creating that center of the community function. We've located the residential on the front of the site, giving its prominence along A Street, using that very small scrapyard site to create an element that extends toward A Street, proposing the lab use by the bypass road, activating along the streetscapes, and creating a sort of Wooner style shared street connections between the buildings and through the buildings. Creating a nice flow pattern in there, as well as creating the pocket park where we can. This small piece here is a existing surface parking lot that the proponent was unable to secure, though there was a lot of effort to it. So we're doing our best to sort of work with that and mitigate that. As Dante also mentioned, the existing Accenture residence has some units that all the views out of their units face out over the existing parking lot. So we've pulled the building back to allow those units to continue to have a view. Proposing an upper level terrace area for the use by the residents. These are some pedestrian realms view along A Street, creating the bike lane, sidewalks that work with complete streets on the smaller side of the complete street, because of its nature where it is, creating an opportunity for cafe seating along the street. This is a view a little further back showing the entrances between West 4, between the residential and the research building, and a view down 4th Street. And as I mentioned earlier, creating the 70-foot sort of podium level, and then stepping back all of the upper elements so you maintain the height that was envisioned in the .av plan. This is a view of the connector and drop-off area. Working through, this is a view of the bank building or the credit union building, opportunity for a little bit of green space to enhance the walk along A Street and your connection to the site.
These are just to the proponent team that we are approaching time here. How many additional slides do you have?
I have a few slides. I'll go very brief. These are the complete streets and showing the street sections. Site plan, I'll skip that. This is just showing the how we're conforming and meeting some of the intent of the .av plan, as well as the life science guidelines in terms of setting the penthouse within the volumes. Views of the architecture, looking at creating pedestrian scale architecture in the pedestrian realm on the lower podium, creating urban scale on an upper level. Same thing with the second building. Pedestrian scale on the lower level and using 3-dimensional facade treatments to create a larger building elements as you go up. On the credit union headquarters, having its entrance and focus on that corner, giving it street presence and allowing it to be that anchor in the neighborhood, and then using brick to create it as a sense of permanence for their concept. And those are just some elevations. And so I've went through everything and happy to go back to anything that anybody would like to see in detail.
Great. We also have a very brief presentation on BPDA feedback given to date by Scott Slarsky. Lizzie, if you wouldn't mind bringing up those slides. Scott, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thanks, Christina. Yes, I can see the slide. So this is a really critical site, a kind of gateway to South Boston. Dorchester Ave is quickly changing from an industrial zone that hits directly a residential zone. So how we treat these kinds of spaces urbanistically is really important. So it's almost as if we haven't engaged so much about the architecture as about the urban plan here. And point one here is the question is, what is the urban condition that will be created here with regard to the street wall and building height at the apex of this site on Dorchester Ave? Is a one-story building really the right move at that point? And then the edge conditions as they move down A Street and how you move from the residential building to the lab building and how that programming and public realm is supported as you move down A Street. And next. And the questions with regard to the interactions between these buildings and the public realm. What is the nature of the public realm at the edges of the site in particular? And with regard to these spaces between the buildings, how can landscape and urbanscape at the interior of this site be more public, more green, and more welcoming to pedestrians? Is that really the right place, as Ted had mentioned, for a service zone? So thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Chair Love, that concludes the presentation portion.
Great. Maybe we can start by having a site plan up. And honestly, I don't know where to start because I think there's so many items to talk about, and it's certainly not architecture. I think some of the planning principles that are being presented that are not consistent with what, the BPDA staff just shared with us is deeply concerning to me. And so I don't know where to start the conversation amongst commissioners, but I do feel it's troubling that the planning principles that were presented to us are not adhered to in the presentation we just reviewed. So I think I'll just open it up with that, and Linda, pass it on to Linda.
Oh, thanks, Mimi. Yeah, I appreciate that comment because I was feeling the same, and also appreciated Scott's presentation because a lot of the comments that I had as this team was moving through their presentation were the ones that Scott had brought up as well. So I guess I'm curious if one way forward might be to have comments from commissioners now, Mimi, and that those could actually be pieces that the proponent could continue to work with BPDA on before they come back to a subcommittee. That might give a little bit more time to go through the comments, but I'm happy to share some of mine. So the first is that I think, you know, Ted, as you were presenting some of the kind of zoning envelopes and planning principles, then we see that this plan, it's hard to put the two together and to really understand, well, if you know, life science labs are not permitted in this area, and yet we're seeing a building devoted to that, and if the heights are being exceeded in a couple of locations, then that seems somewhat troubling. So I guess I would love to have a little bit more understanding about the conversations maybe that occurred between the city and the proponent, just to understand maybe what the trade-offs were or where the comfort level was hit. So that would be really helpful to understand. Also, just picking up on Scott's comments, you know, these urban connectors are such a good idea, connecting into the mid-block here, but I do find them very confusing because you can see that they also service that small surface parking lot behind the credit union. They service a parking entry under the residential building, and they service a pretty large service area in the lab building. And so I think these might actually function more as streets or alleys rather than as open space. And so I would love to have the proponent think more closely about that and how to introduce more green space, and even some of the measures that we would see with development related to sustainability, such as kind of stormwater retention. So that would be another comment. And then the third is just understanding the three architectural elements together. There is such a difference between the corner with the credit union and the height and massing of that building, and then the two taller tower-like buildings. And because you have that confluence of Dot Ave and Fifth and A coming together, it really does feel like that credit union site would be a more important place for a larger building that could really anchor that corner. And so I'd love to kind of learn more about that too when the time is appropriate.
Could I just interject for one moment? I just want to explain a little bit of the context around that. So the credit union is a partner in this. They're not selling it to us outright. And their requirement was to have it to be a standalone building without any additional development above it, because we did talk to them about that. So I just wanted to respond to that. Gold Street actually has an easement in existence to serve the residential building. So we have limited rights on what we can do on Gold Street with regard to the access to the residential building. And we're also complying with the guidelines for lab buildings in the city with the zoning, the loading being internal to the site. So again, many of the items we've done in the context in which it was developed were in response to both that as well as the Dot Ave plan. And again, as I stated earlier, the underlying district, the restricted manufacturing, does allow for lab to be utilized in this district. So I just wanted to clarify all that.
Yeah, Dante, I think that's helpful context. There will be a time where we get to have a real conversation and go back and forth.
Yep,
but in the interest of getting the commissioners to all give their feedback, I think it would be, I'm just going to keep on going.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Catherine.
Mimi, I'm just going to add one quick thing. Dante, you and David, I think we all recognize you have a very, very complex site here, and some existing conditions that you don't have full control over. And so you're trying to be creative with that. And I think I certainly appreciate that. I think for me, it just feels like it might not be as fully evolved as many projects that we see. And so that's really the nature of my comments, but thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Catherine?
Good evening. I'm struggling a little bit with the connection points or how these buildings can relate to each other. I appreciate the 3 buckets in terms of what is attempted to be approached here. Immediately what's come to mind for me is, given the kind of the origins of the site now compared to what's being proposed, is I'm not sure, there seems like parking is being lost, and this kind of corner where the credit union is, that's a very high traffic area. And so safety is a concern of mine, but also how is that actually really engaging with community is what I'm lost at here in this connection. Considering where it currently sits to where it is now, it just seems like it's gonna not be a place, for people to see that location as a beacon, and then how that connects to kind of all the other entrance ways or the story you're trying to tell with these other buildings. I'm a little lost in that context for me, and so I want to understand more. But currently, as it stands, I'm not seeing the through line at all.
Thanks, Catherine. Anne Marie?
Thank you for your presentation. Could you go back to, I think, page number 8 in this presentation? My comments really, I share the concerns of my colleagues. Yes, that one. When we review this in subcommittee, I'd like to, again, better understand the context. This is one point of view of the site, as I understand it, where one of the concerns or considerations is a variance in the height. So understanding, we spend a lot of time at BCDC reviewing, projects at the public realm in terms of the ground plane. And I just want to understand how this development sits on the skyline of the city, how it fits along the Dot Avenue corridor, because I think that will, that's related to the comments of my colleagues about where there's height, or why should we consider a variation in height. So that's part of the context that I'd like to understand as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Jonathan?
Thanks. I guess what I would love to see in subcommittee is just a little bit more about maybe kind of a response or a meaningful look at kind of the urban design diagram, just sort of in concert to what some of the things that we've been hearing from the city in terms of the planning in the region. Just in terms of how do we foster greater connectivity, how do we think about what is the appropriate way to anchor the corner? I mean, I hear you on bank needed to be standalone, but is there a scenario where the bank is at the opposite corner of A Street? I guess I just want to understand how the placement of these things is in service to a larger kind of shared urban design goal. I think I appreciate the presentation. I think a lot of the architectural moves are really interesting, but I guess I don't think we can get too deep into those without getting more kind of alignment on just the general location of these sort of big masses. Because I think there's definitely a lot to just what's been said already to just sort of reckon with in terms of how these things come together and sort of blend with the sort of character of the neighborhood. It's definitely a challenging site, so I certainly appreciate the difficulty there. And I guess another thing I've considered just also is maybe this is the second meeting, but more kind of longer view step back just to sort of better see how the massing here really sort of transitions with and meets the neighborhood at some of the more sensitive edges.
Thanks, Jonathan. Shauna?
Thanks, Mimi. Could we go back to the site plan? And Dante and David, I do want to reiterate what some of my colleagues have mentioned about the challenges. We understanding the challenges of the particular site, as well as the challenges of the constraints. And also a very unusual position with respect to Dorchester, that it's a bunch of individual pieces that do not seem to be working together. And
Shauna.
I think the proportion of the site, you can't hear.
Yeah, maybe turn off your camera. We're losing you.
Yeah, I apologize. If you could restate all that, I apologize. I couldn't really make out much of it.
Yeah, we can.
Yep.
It's a little better.
No, and if you can hear me clearly now, is it better now?
Yes.
Yes.
Not really. So what I wanted to say, first of all, I want to reiterate the challenges of the site. It's an extremely challenging site. Extremely challenging constraints, and a very unusual relationship to Dorchester Ave. But I also echo my colleagues' perspective that the buildings are a little bit of a patchwork with respect to each other, and particularly given the challenge of the place where you would probably want the most prominence, right on the corner of the relation of Dorchester Ave. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is the proportion of the open space that's given over to effectively the vehicular service, because it isn't. I don't really feel it's a successful shared space, and I would really look at ways, maybe one of those branches becoming more about pedestrian green open space, and the other one being more service focused. A lot of challenges from an access perspective, but I think given that there's a lot of open space on the site and it's almost all service space, I think trying to see if there's a way to shift that proportion and still provide the access that you need to the different particular spaces. I would encourage you a lot. As well as I just want to ask a question about and again, this can be addressed in subcommittee, is there any particular response to resilience, or is this all going to be at a street level? And again, we can talk about that in subcommittee.
Understood.
But it is a tough challenge. Thank you.
Bill Ron?
Yeah, so it strikes me that given what's been going on west of Dorchester Avenue and the planning processes there have a major impact on what then must be suggested for sites east of Dorchester Avenue. And the latest plan, of course, has taken a strong stand on that, and has struck me as wise, but it just impresses upon me the care we all must do for sites on the east side of Dorchester Avenue. And therefore, I look forward to careful conversations about this in committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Laura?
A lot has been said that I think is going to be helpful to go forward and then have further discussions in subcommittee. One thing I want to mention is I understand that there are a lot of complications. One of them is topography. I don't quite understand the relationship in particular of the lab building. Not so much the lab building as the footprint of the lab building site relative to all of the topography around it of the existing roads. I think it would be important for us to understand how that works and what kind of challenge that's also presenting for you. The other thing to think about in terms of the public realm is that in the public realm and the way the city thinks about the public realm, I don't think it's necessarily about square footage as it is about the quality of that public realm. And these days, I think it's, the understanding that occupancy is really critical in the public realm, not just pass through, not just sharing the space, but in fact, having a place to actually occupy. And whether it's for the neighborhood at large or it's for the people in the buildings, I don't think we've quite reached that, that point. It is a challenging site, but it's also a big site. It's not a small site by any means. And so I think that there's room for some alternate thinking about how the buildings can speak to each other and how the public realm can be wrapped into that thinking. So I'll look forward to further discussions in subcommittee.
Thank you.
Sounds great, Laura. I'll just add a couple of comments because I think my fellow commissioners have really honed in on some important pieces. I know that there's a parcel that's left over that is not part of the project, but I still think whether it becomes part of a project at a later date or not, we really need to understand the future of that parcel and how it's going to be part of this larger whole. I do think there's a lot of importance to consider at the corner of Dot Ave and where you're proposing that two-story credit union. And I'm just going to suggest that that's really not the right location for a two-story building and not building out to the density that's allowed at that site. That's a really important artery that's being developed right now. And I just feel like it's just not going to be contributing to that vision that, is being created for Dot Ave. And then lastly, I know you have limited space, but the lab building is really in a complicated location in this fabric that is really all stick built, all residential. And by the way, 4th Street is a major artery for people to, leave and arrive and get to South Boston. That's a really important street, almost equally important to West Broadway in terms of vehicular traffic. That the program and the density that's being spoken about. And that's with that recording on and off, I will pass it on to my commissioners to.
Chair Love, I don't know why the recording had paused, briefly, but we were just resuming it there.
We have to do public comment.
Yeah, that we flagged. We have to do public comment.
Okay.
There's Linda has her hand up.
Mimi, I had a suggestion. I wondered if Ted would mind popping up the slides that he started this with. And now that we've seen this and had the discussion, I think it might be really helpful to now understand, which portions of the project are in conformance with the planning principles and which are not. I think that'll give us a better sense of how to structure future subcommittee meetings. Ted, would you mind doing that?
Certainly, Commissioner. I think that the not necessarily the scale of the residential building, but a residential building at a slightly lower scale is something that's consistent with what was envisioned in the plan. Maybe the next slide would be a little more helpful, Lizzie. Thank you. A residential building poking up to 120 feet would be certainly appropriate. And then thinking about one of the other complementary uses, the proposed bank, that is very well aligned with the type of commercial uses that were envisioned for this site. I think, and again, that's a little bit of my bias as a planner to think about use and trying to orient it to the conversation around design that this commission looks at. I think another important piece to salvage from this that's relevant to the planning is thinking about the provision of maybe true public streets or true linear open spaces. And based on what I heard from the commissioners, that perhaps with a different site plan, and different vehicular access, including loading, that there's enough land here to maybe effectuate some of those goals for improved connectivity, either over streets or linear open spaces. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah,
thank you. Do you mind putting up that other chart? I can't remember if it's, I think you had maybe 4. Okay, this one. And just walking through this with us again, and you know, where is this design today, and what do we have kind of in this overlay?
Well, sorry that I didn't address this. Unfortunately, this is for the current zoning, and so while the planning process was being conducted, there was always the intention to turn it into zoning. I wasn't around at that time, but my understanding that there was a process situation where the zoning didn't get a chance to get updated. So both in terms of the use and the dimension, unfortunately, our current zoning, which is what's reflected here in the column to the left, does not reflect what was in the planning process, nor what staff think would be appropriate in terms of use or dimension. So as you can see on here, you know, they were looking at 2 or 3 story FAR1 manufacturing buildings when this zoning was written, you know, many decades ago. And so, you know, I think that it's important to respect our zoning, but in the case where a proponent is looking for exceptions and variances to the zoning code, and as I heard tonight, they wish to make the case based on alignment with current planning rather than zoning, it would probably be incumbent on all of us to look at the .app plan process, even though that's not reflected in the underlying zoning right now.
That's super helpful. I think when I first saw this chart, Ted, and then saw the proposed height and massing, it was a little bit alarming. But I think what I'm hearing is that, you know, this predated the development that we're now seeing in this district. And so this is an exercise about figuring out what the right massing and height would be to fit within the future context, really, of this district. Is that fair?
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, this was at a time when so this zoning code is old, and there always have been the intention to replace it, and I understand it's still the long-term intentions of my department to replace that with zoning that's better aligned with the plan. And so you know, it's inconsistent with the planning context to be contemplating a 2-story manufacturing building, and really the framework, if anyone seeks zoning relief, that I encourage the commissioners to consider is this framework of on the west side of Ave, up to 300 stories, a range of new job producing uses, and then on the east side of Ave, stepping down to 150 feet, then 75 feet, then the wood frame context that Commissioner Love mentioned, and then predominant residential uses and uses to serve those, and then all the, you know, accordant public realm implications from those residential and complementary commercial typologies that would come from that.
Thanks, Ted. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And so with that, maybe we'll see if there's public comments.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Chair Love, at this time, I am not seeing any raised hands.
All right, so commissioners, any thoughts?
Mimi, one idea is to spend the first subcommittee meeting just talking about the broad urban design moves. Understanding where this is sitting in today's context, and also where it would be sitting in the future context of this part of .Av. That might be one part. The second is understanding some of the bold moves about height and massing. A third might be to understand what I'm going to call kind of the interstitial spaces, which is currently more of the paved and some open space, and trying to understand the relationship of that to the neighborhood, to the buildings. And then fourth might be the relationship of the buildings to each other. And for me, at least, I think that would be a great way to kind of take a step back and capture some of the questions and comments from commissioners today.
I think that's a great framework. I guess where I'm struggling with is the actual use of labs on this site. And if that is not supported by the city, how are we supposed to think about that in a commission setting?
Although I did see on the chart that it was permitted. I had heard the same thing, and then saw that was clarified on the chart.
So I do think that, I just want to jump in here, Mimi. I think it's an excellent question. I think Ted clarified that in his latest remarks. I do think that these are important conversations that will continue to be ongoing. And I think in the context of the BCDC sort of review purview, I think it's important to focus the conversation on, I think, a lot of the elements that Linda identified here around overall form. And these conversations around the use will continue to evolve within the BPDA through our process. And I think, we really want to be able to provide you with that context as those conversations evolve, and we'll make sure to bring that to you in subcommittee. But I do think that, those are two different tracks in a way that we continue to work on with the proponent team.
Okay. Can I just ask a clarifying question? Because maybe I just didn't understand what Ted explained. I definitely understand the DOT plan and west of, Dorchester Ave, but do those uses across to the east side in this triangle area that we were reviewing tonight? I think I just might have not followed that thread.
With the context that Diana just outlined, that there's a separate track that can address use issues, but just to clarify the history of zoning and planning, the legacy manufacturing zoning that envisioned two-story manufacturing buildings, that legacy zoning that's still on the books does allow labs, but during the planning process, the intention was to update the zoning to not allow labs on this side of Dot Ave.
So it's like a both and situation. I get it.
And I think the key piece here, Mimi, that Ted tried to clarify is that zoning, the planning work happened, but the zoning never got adopted. So, we're sort of in this in-between period. And I think that's what we're trying to negotiate here. But again, we will happily bring that context to you all in subcommittee, but I do want to sort of maybe focus the conversation a little bit more on public realm, urban design, architectural moves.
That said, it would still be helpful to, at least for me, to have as a first step in our subcommittee meetings, one meeting that's focused on understanding the context. So just again, the Dot Avenue, both the planning context, the work that's undergoing, but not yet, fully enacted, the other development that affects this, from the other development that's either completed, underway, in review, that is kind of part of the Dot Ave corridor, so to speak, and then how that corridor relates to the city as a whole. So this comes back to thinking about public realm as not just the ground plane, but also how new urban development sits within the fabric of the city, both the immediate surrounding fabric, but also the broader city fabrics. I feel like that, we're so much of the development that we're reviewing are in these areas that are going through dramatic change in scale, and just how do we think of this holistically in the midst of needing to review projects individually. So that context would be very helpful for me, even just foundationally, to understand then the specific project.
Thanks, Anne Marie. So do we have a motion?
I can try a motion. So I would make a motion to send a subcommittee with the caveat that that when the proponent comes back, that we start to talk about some of these macro issues rather than necessarily see the same slides that we saw today. So if that means that the proponent is comfortable, you know, taking a few weeks to get those put together, or even a month or so, I think that would create a more worthwhile and productive meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So motion to send a subcommittee with those notes.
Yeah, I agree with that, Linda. And I just want to, you know, be crystal clear that we're talking about looking at alternative strategies, and what we're presented today is what we're expecting in the first subcommittee. And thinking about the site and its urbanistic conditions in a different way than it was presented, I think is an important first meeting. So your motion still holds, Linda. I just wanted to be, you know, clear that. Is there a second? Or
I was going to say, can I summarize that for the record?
Yes.
To remand the proposed project to further review at BCDC Design Subcommittee with additional information pertaining to macro project scale, including potentially alternative site plan and massing scenarios. Does that capture it?
I'd like to see kind of those 4 areas that we talked about a few minutes ago. How does it sit in the existing and future context? How do we think about you know, the open space? How do we think about the building forms, and how do we think about the relationship of the buildings to each other on the site? I think Mimi and I are saying the same thing, but just a little bit of a.
I just want to build enough time for the proponent to respond, you know, with a thoughtful, you know, proposition.
And I would just like to add to, I think that is also in dialogue with BPDA staff, because I feel like we got a very, which is appropriate, a very zoomed in response, but I think collectively we need to zoom out as well. So maybe that we might benefit from a refresh from staff as part of that subcommittee of, again, a more holistic understanding of how this particular parcel fits into the broader vision and development going on. And I'll leave it up to BPDA staff to sort of determine whether it's, you know, who does what, whether it's proponent or BPDA. But I would like to hear more of the context from BPDA staff.
Yeah, I definitely think a clause with support from the BPDA staff to send back to the BCDC.
That I would make a second.
I think we have the longest motion ever.
I just added the appendix, the last clause at the end. BPDA staff should be present at the subcommittee meeting to address outstanding planning and regulatory context questions.
Do you want to read it from the top, Christina, or?
Yes, although I struggled a little bit, Commissioner Eastley, with your reference to the 4 elements you mentioned earlier about existing and future context. So I captured to remand the proposed project to further review at BCDC Design Subcommittee with additional information pertaining to existing and future site context, including potentially alternative site plan and massing scenarios. BPDA staff should be present to address outstanding questions regarding planning and regulatory context. Apologies, Commissioner Eastley, if that's not quite what you meant when you said outstanding, the 4 elements you referred to.
Close enough. I think just understanding the open space would be the second. The third would be understanding the building forms, kind of their evolution. And the 4th would be understanding how the buildings relate to one another on the site.
I could also just clarify what I was asked. I think it's more than BPDA staff being present, but just having a presentation from BPDA staff that is more than a response to the project, but just, again, refreshing our memories about the broader context and .av.
Okay, let me give this one more try. To remand the proposed project to further review at the BCDC Design Subcommittee with additional information pertaining to existing and future site context, open space, building form and evolution and relationship between buildings, including potentially alternative site plan and massing scenarios. BPDA staff should be present to contribute broader planning context regarding Dorchester Avenue. I see some nodding, so I think I got closer.
I think it's great. So I don't know if I need to redo the motion, but I make the motion with the caveats that Christina just read. Send to subcommittee with those caveats.
Second.
Terrific. All right. So let me call on all commissioners. Jonathan Evans.
Yes.
Bill Ron.
Yes.
Catherine Morris.
Yes.
Linda Eastley.
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubinow.
Yes.
Laura Solano.
Yes.
And myself, Mimi Love. We
and
will see
Shauna
you.
Gillis-Smith. Yes.
Shauna, I'm sorry you don't have your camera on and I missed you. All right. All right. And with that, we will see you at subcommittee.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your
We
time.
look forward to working with you. Take care.
All right. I think that was our last order of business. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Wait, before we do
Oh.
that, I just wanted to flag for commissioners that we changed the date for the next subcommittee meeting. Previously, I believe on the 23rd, and will now be on the 16th. Thank you.
All right. And with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. Jonathan Evans,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
Yes.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Linda Eastley,
Yes.
Diana Fernandez,
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubinow,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
Kirk Sykes,
Yes.
Shauna Gillis-Smith,
Yes.
and myself, yes. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your time.
Thank
Nice
you.
evening.
Good night,
Thanks.
everybody.
everyone.
Good night.